Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, coming your way with a live stream on a Saturday night in May. Beautiful weather across the country, certainly where I'm located, and here in Connecticut. Beautiful weekend and enjoying the sunshine, and hopefully that's showing with a little bit more color these days on my face, which is good to know. All right, talking college football, even during this dead time. So we're done with spring practice, and we're looking ahead to media days and August camp on the first week of August. But in between, boy, I've got a lot of content ready for you and ready to go and ready to get started on. So we are just about done completing our scheduling series in terms of the non-conference or in terms of the conference scheduling. I've knocked out the Big Ten, the ACC, and the SEC. I still have to do the Pac-12. Of course, we don't address the Big 12 scheduling because what are they going to do about that? They play everyone. Everybody plays everyone. It's a true championship. Then they played the championship game. But for everyone else, there's great discrepancy in the scheduling and in the balance and competitive balance and fairness and equality of the scheduling, and we're addressing that. Again, we've got the Pac-12 to go. Would love to get your feedback on our scheduling system within conference. We're also going to address non-conference scheduling as well. Can't wait to get to that. And I've got a channel update that's posted on the front page of my YouTube channel. I want you to check that out because I leave it wide open for you guys in regards to comments, questions, and suggestions, as I always do, while also laying out over the next several months what my plans are in terms of content to deliver to you. And I've got a lot in store, but I want to hear from you because you guys have some great ideas, of course, as well. All right, tonight I want to look at future schedules in the SEC. So I spent a few minutes looking through the schedules coming up in the SEC and coming up starting obviously this fall. And we're going to talk a lot about the 2018 schedules and already have. Of course, we're breaking them down and fixing them. But more than that, I want to look through future schedules and get your take on some of the games and the matchups and the contracts that have been signed and the agreements that have been made that excite you about future schedules around the SEC out of conference. Because these are the games that really help us in evaluating potential college football playoff teams, for one thing, and also the strength of the conferences. NCIS Fanatic 21, good to see you. And man, if you could leave your name one more time, that would be great. Would love to see your name one more time so I can keep that front and center and address you appropriately. We've got Ohio State coming up with Tony Gerdeman from the Ozone on Monday night, so look forward to that. That'll be a live stream at, I believe, 6:30 Eastern time. Tony Gerdeman, the Ozone. That should be a great time. Future schedules in the SEC. And of course, you guys can ask me anything concerning the world of college football or make your comments or suggestions, but we're going to try to keep focused on future schedules in the SEC. If you're joining me for a first time, stumbling across this, love college football, this is your spot right here. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you prefer the audio, just go to Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, or what I missed there, Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, Google Play. With the audio, just search Mark Rogers TV. Future schedules for Alabama. This season, of course, they open with Lamar Jackson, less Louisville. That would have been a great matchup, of course, Lamar Jackson versus the Alabama defense. But we've got Lamar Jackson, or he's off to the Baltimore Ravens. Louisville in Orlando against the Tide. Alabama, then the three other games are forgettable, of course. Arkansas State, Louisiana Lafayette, and the Citadel to warm up for the Iron Bowl, as they typically do in the SEC, and specifically Alabama and Auburn in preparation for the Iron Bowl. 2019, the big game for Alabama, Duke. That's the big game for Alabama in 2019. Very disappointing there. New Mexico State, Southern Miss, and ECU, East Carolina, the other three games for the Tide. Over the next several seasons, excluding a few teams in the SEC, I find it interesting that there are about 3 games non-conference scheduled. And there could be two theories here. They need to fill out the non-conference schedule, those particular programs, or maybe the SEC is contemplating going to 9 games, as has the SEC and, of course, or the Big Ten, and before that, the Pac-12 playing a 9-game conference schedule. Or, as Nick Saban has suggested, play 9 games. So in 2020, there's no big opponent for Alabama. It's Georgia State and Kent State. In 2021, look out for this one, Miami fans. The Canes and the Tide in Atlanta, 2021. 2022, Utah State's the only one of 4 non-conference games on the schedule right now signed by Alabama. And in 2028-29, just announced here in the last 2 weeks, Notre Dame, home and home, Alabama. Of course, if you're a college football fan, you've got to be excited about that. I realized the last time these two programs were on the same field, Manti Te'o looked like he should have been a future undrafted free agent, and Notre Dame looked slow and intimidated, and Alabama crushed them 42-14, didn't do the actual play on the field justice, and Alabama won a national championship. But you've got to be excited about Notre Dame and Alabama. SEC cupcake schedules out of conference. One of Ray's big themes. There it is, talking about the SEC and Alabama in particular, not scheduling tough out of conference games. Well, Ray, until they get to work here in the next 10 years, I've got to agree with you. 2018 Louisville, who's a top 30 type team. 2019 Duke, that's the best that Alabama can give us. And then again, they haven't scheduled anyone for 2020. 2021, the game in Atlanta against Miami, and Notre Dame 28 and 29. Alabama doesn't play anybody once again this year except for Auburn. Yeah, their non-division games are pretty lackluster in Tennessee and somebody with 2 wins. 2 or 3 wins, 4 wins, something like that. Missouri, Tennessee, the Eastern Division games for Alabama. Okay, let's look at Auburn's schedule. This year, they've got the nice game against Washington in Atlanta. Love that matchup. Alabama State, Southern Miss, Liberty. So again, the 3 throwaway games, complete throwaway games. Southern Miss will provide maybe some resistance, but Washington and Atlanta. Okay, 2019, here's a nice little game. Auburn, Oregon in Arlington, Texas. They played for the national championship 9 seasons prior to what will be that matchup. Where was that national championship game? I would believe that was at the Fiesta Bowl in Glendale, Arizona. Auburn, Oregon. And in 2019, the Tigers also played Tulane, Kent State, and Samford. I'm very impressed with Kent State. As I went through the SEC future schedules, I started to see a trend that Kent State's making its way through the entire SEC. Alabama, Auburn, I believe LSU, Mississippi State, and there's more. For Auburn in 2020, okay, this is pretty bad. Southern Miss, UMass, Alabama, A&M. So this is where we get to the portion where some of these SEC teams have 3 non-conference games scheduled. So I'm wondering about the possibility that there's strong talk that they go to 9 games within the conference, or they just all need to pick up another game. And for most of them, they need to pick up a serious game, because for Auburn in 2020, Southern Miss, UMass, and Alabama and A&M. 2021 Auburn's schedule. Love this one. Traveling to Penn State. So I credit the SEC for finally traveling. This hasn't happened forever. And now we see Alabama scheduling Notre Dame. We're going to have to wait forever. We're all going to have gray hair by the time it happens. But Alabama going to South Bend to take on Notre Dame. Of course, we've got Georgia going to Notre Dame last year, and now Penn State hosting Auburn. Tigers go to Nittany Lions 2021. That year, they also have Georgia State and Alabama State. 2022, Penn State returns the trip to the Plains. Love that. Last time Penn State and Auburn got together would have been the Outback Bowl of 1995, and Auburn really took them out. Actually, they played in 95, and Penn State won that game big. And then they played around 2002 with Auburn winning a Capital One Bowl against Penn State. So 2022, Penn State comes back for the return trip to take on Auburn. The Tigers also have Western Kentucky and Mercer. Then they've got a Cal series that I can't get real excited about right now. 2023 and 24, Auburn and Cal home and home. Let's see what we've got on here. While we schedule teams like Oklahoma, TCU, and Virginia Tech, Alabama plays Arkansas State, Lafayette, and the Citadel. Miami plays Florida in 19. Yeah, get into that game, Frank. I want to go to a 9-game conference schedule so badly. Ryan, why would you like to do that? It's just better games, more competition. I do agree that I would like to see uniform scheduling across the board by the conferences. And since the Big Ten and the Pac-12 have gone that way, and because the conferences are so big and so massive, that if you're only going to play 2 teams in the other division, and there's 7 teams in that division, and one of them you play every year, you're rotating 1 game through 6 teams, meaning you play the other division teams only once every 6 years. That shouldn't happen in a conference. That's not really a conference. When Alabama plays Florida once every 6 years, are they really conference opponents? All right. Ray comes back with agreed. Bama's a disgrace. Ryan, Georgia plays Notre Dame again in 19. Yes, we're getting to that. Ray, Georgia, Notre Dame, instant classic. 20-19, really good game. Yes. Ryan, what do you think about the talks of Georgia and Clemson playing in 21 and 22? So that's natural. They played, about 5 years ago? They had a nice home-and-home series when Mark Richt was still with Georgia and played 2 really competitive games before Clemson became great during that Sammy Watkins era. And they played and split 2 games. And that's a natural series that we'll talk about when we talk about, and I cut the video very soon, on non-conference scheduling. And one of my objectives is to see great regional and national matchups, meaning Oklahoma, Ohio State, great national matchup. This past season, South Carolina and North Carolina State, great regional out-of-conference matchup. LSU, of course, they've got Miami. Looking forward to that game. One of the big 2 for opening weekend. Southeast Louisiana, Louisiana Tech, and Rice. Okay. There's always just going to be one for these SEC teams, unless you play in the East and you've got a designated rival against the ACC and you jump out and play another game like Georgia did this year. Georgia Tech, one opponent, and also Notre Dame. So for the teams in the SEC Western Division, when does anybody ever play 2 tough games? Never. I'm sure you can find it possibly somewhere. 2019 for LSU, their big games at Texas. Like that matchup, of course. Georgia Southern, Northwestern State, Utah State. 2020, you've got Texas, LSU in Death Valley. They play Rice. Interesting location here for LSU and Rice. They play Rice a few times here coming up in the next 5 years. And one of these games in 2020, they're not exactly traveling to Rice. They're going to play at Reliant NRG Stadium. And also in 2020 for LSU, it's Texas San Antonio, not necessarily a pushover there, and Nicholls State. Remember Troy. 2021 for LSU, they start the UCLA series going on the road to the Rose Bowl. McNeese State, Central Michigan, Louisiana Monroe. And then they've got a smattering of matchups that they've signed for future years. 2022, New Mexico. Okay, there's the return game in 2024 with UCLA and also Rice again. And then LSU has signed contracts for home-and-home series with Arizona State in 2026 and 29. Nice little matchup with the Pac-12. And Oklahoma LSU, rematch of the 2003 national championship game at the Superdome, where, of course, LSU beat Jason White and company for the national title. They play Oklahoma, does LSU, 2027 and 28. All right. Wasn't Clemson and Georgia a bit of a rivalry back in the 80s? Yes, they played quite often, and Georgia saved its season the year they won the national championship in 1980 with the Lindsey Scott play of 90-some yards on a 3rd and 18, fourth down play, whatever it was, a long touchdown pass down the left sideline. Lindsey Scott went all the way to preserve the undefeated season, and Georgia went on in 1980 to win it all. Mississippi State never plays anyone. Well, they're slightly changing that in Starkville. What have been their big games in the last 10 years? BYU, Mississippi State. Yeah. All right, 2018 this year, they've got the game at Kansas State. Nice little under-the-radar matchup. Stephen F. Austin, Louisiana Lafayette, Louisiana Tech. Mississippi State and some teams in the SEC Western Division love playing Louisiana Tech. And they played a game this past season that produced one of the oddest plays in college football this past season, when Louisiana Tech fumbled and the ball got kicked, and they finally recovered inside their own 10 or 15-yard line, and it set up a 3rd and goal from their own 8-yard line. All right, back to Mississippi State's schedule for next season, 2019. They got the return trip, K-State coming to Stark Vegas. You got Abilene Christian, Southern Miss, Mississippi State, fine, like that game. Good in-state, out-of-conference game. That's fine as a secondary game. Louisiana Lafayette. 2020, at NC State. Mississippi State and Dak Prescott playing the Wolfpack a couple of years ago and dismantling NC State in a bowl game. So they will play again in 2020 at NC State. They also have Tulane. That's another common game for LSU, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss to play Tulane. And Memphis. They like to play Memphis. When I was there in the late 90s, Mississippi State and Ole Miss always played Memphis. 2020, again, the big game for Mississippi State's at NC State. They also have Tulane, UMass, Alcorn State. All right. Ryan goes with, I'm low-key looking forward to the Ole Miss Texas Tech game. And yes, we had covered the Alabama-Miami game of 2021. What's the best SEC non-conference rivalry? It would have to be Florida State, typically. Not necessarily right now, but all time and in recent times, Florida State. Don't you guys think? All right, elsewhere for Mississippi State, if you go to 2021, Louisiana Tech, NC State, at Memphis, Eastern Illinois. 2022, the big games at Arizona for Mississippi State. They've got Northwestern State, and they've got Memphis. Mississippi State comes back in 2023. They've got Arizona again, another Southern Miss, another game at Tulane, this time on the road, and Southeast Louisiana. All right, 2024, the Bulldogs play at Arizona State. Mississippi State at Arizona State. Can't recall them ever playing. And they've got another game at Southern Miss. An SEC team, Mississippi State, playing at Southern Miss back-to-back years, 2023 and 24. Interesting. No, actually, the first game's at home, but they do play them 2 years prior to that at Southern Miss. So they go back to Southern Miss. And they've got Eastern Kentucky. 2025 is the return game, Arizona State, Mississippi State. And then Mississippi State has signed home and homes with Minnesota, 2026 and 27, and Troy. But Minnesota, Mississippi State, can't remember those two getting together. And 2028 and 29, Mississippi State, Texas Tech. All right, checking out the chat there. Don't see a whole lot there. What are you guys excited about? I'm running through all the teams in the SEC and their future schedules, and laying waste to some of these future schedules, especially just in a few years. You got a number of teams in the SEC that have scheduled 3 non-conference games, meaning they still have to schedule the 4th, or the conference is going to go to a 9-game conference schedule. And for some of these teams, if they haven't locked up another major team, their schedule is going to be awful. I read you Auburn's for a few years where they've got nobody, at least that one particular year. Okay, for Ole Miss, You got, as Ryan mentioned, the big game against Texas Tech in Houston this year. They've got Southern Illinois, Kent State, and Louisiana Monroe. I tell you, Kent State is doing an SEC tour over the next 10 years. Ole Miss is taking on Cal in 2019. Those two teams have already played a home and home that just concluded last season. So Ole Miss and Cal getting back together. Ole Miss at Memphis, Southeast Louisiana, and New Mexico State. That's in 2019. 2020, Ole Miss taking on Baylor in Houston. Can't remember those two teams getting together. Southeast Missouri, Middle Tennessee, and Georgia Southern. 2021 for Ole Miss, they got Louisville in Atlanta. So the Cardinals have Alabama this season in Atlanta, and then they take on Ole Miss in 21. Ole Miss in 21 also has Austin Peay, Tulane, and Liberty. 2022, they got Troy, Central Arkansas at Georgia Tech. So that's the big one for Ole Miss that season, at Georgia Tech and Tulsa. Next season in 2023, Ole Miss taking on Georgia Tech, also Mercer, and at Tulane. A lot of Tulane in there for Ole Miss and Mississippi State. 2024 starts a home and home between Ole Miss and Wake Forest. So Ole Miss diving into those ACC waters, but not treading too deep with Georgia Tech home and Wake home in 24 and 25. Ole Miss also takes on Furman, so they've got to schedule a few games. They've got Wake Forest, Tulane, and the Citadel in 2025. All right, what are we asking here? NCIS Fanatic 21. The late 80s. I know it was the same year that we lost to Washington. So if we're talking Ohio State, 1986 was that Ohio State matchup against Alabama in the kickoff classic. 16-10 win for the Tide, 1986. And then Ohio State traveled out to Washington and got their butts kicked 40-7. And then rallied with 9 consecutive wins before they lost to Michigan to lose out on the Rose Bowl, but still tie for the Big Ten championship, if you remember that right. Vanderbilt series versus Notre Dame. Yes, we're getting to that as well. Arkansas is up next. 2018, nothing for the Hogs. I know they're bad, but do they have to play a horrible schedule too? Eastern Illinois, Colorado State on the road, North Texas, and Tulane. That's what we've got from Arkansas this year. Embarrassing. Shouldn't happen. Awful. Next season for Arkansas, 2019, nothing. Portland State, Colorado State, San Jose State, Western Kentucky. Where's TCU? Where's Texas? All right, 2020, Kent State at Notre Dame. Arkansas at Notre Dame. So the Irish have the Georgia series, of course. They've got Alabama, and they've got Arkansas, and I believe somebody else is coming up. Ryan mentioned Vandy, Notre Dame as well. So Arkansas at Notre Dame in 20. And 21, they've got Texas. So I applaud this game. Love it, love it, love it. For old purists, college football fans, to see Texas and Arkansas on the same field will do our hearts good. Texas, Arkansas, 2021. Good stuff. Arkansas in 21 also has Missouri State and Georgia Southern. Then they've got Notre Dame at home in 25. So there you got the story for the SEC Western Division. NCIS Fanatic 21, do you think we'll ever schedule Alabama again like that in a season opener? I sure would hope so. Alabama, Ohio State, who would not want to see that series? All right, Georgia Bulldogs, suddenly one of the elites of college football thanks to Kirby Smart and recruiting. 2018, this is disappointing. Georgia Tech's the big game. They're always the big game non-conference, but there's nobody else for Georgia. They've got UMass, Middle Tennessee, and Austin Peay. 2019, Georgia's got Notre Dame and Georgia Tech, Arkansas State, Murray State. So we'll assume Georgia Tech's on the schedule all the way through for Georgia, which they are all the way through 2023, and I'm sure that will be extended forever. 2020, Virginia matches up against the SEC. Look at the Cavaliers diving in there against Georgia. Virginia, Georgia. Don't know if that's going to be a good game unless things drastically change in Charlottesville with Bronco Mendenhall. But Virginia, Georgia in Atlanta to open up 2020. Then Georgia also has Louisiana Monroe. In 21, they've got UAB. They've got San Jose State. In 22, they've got Kent State. Kent State taking on LSU and Ole Miss and Mississippi State and Alabama and Georgia and Auburn. And then in 2023, Georgia has Indiana State. In 25 and 26, I somehow just like this matchup. Georgia and UCLA home and home, 2025 and 26. Florida. What's interesting when I went through the future schedules is that Florida and Florida State are not listed past 2020. The other big rivalries out of conference, Kentucky, Louisville, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida, or the other one, what am I missing? South Carolina, Clemson, all listed for a number of years. Florida, Florida State, not past 2020. I got to think that that's going to change here quickly and they'll get things righted. All right. What do we have on the chat before I get to the Florida schedule? Arkansas got shut out by a Big 12 team. When was that? Arkansas got shut out. They lost 28-7 to TCU, if you're thinking of that game, Frank. Why is it Alabama never plays non-conference in-state teams like UAB, Troy, Samford, Alabama State, Alabama A&M? They probably should make that a priority. If those teams and those schools and programs want to play them, they should make that a priority like other huge schools like Ohio State. You'll see they always schedule a MAC team within the state of Ohio to help out those schools. Why does the playoff committee reward those soft out-of-conference schedules? Well, they did with Washington 2 years ago. There's no doubt about that. Their only game was against a 1-11 Rutgers team. That was their only Power 5 game, and Washington got and their toughest in-conference game. They lost to USC at home and still made the college football playoff. So for Florida this year, they've got Charleston Southern, Colorado, and Idaho, and of course, Florida State. 2019, Miami versus Florida. Love that one. UT Martin and Towson. 2020. The only thing Florida has scheduled in 2020 is Eastern Washington and South Alabama. They got to get to work. They also have Florida State. That's the last listed year officially that Florida and Florida State play is 2020. Samford is the one non-conference scheduled game in 2021 for Florida. All right, Kentucky. The Cats this year have Central Michigan, Murray State, Middle Tennessee, and Louisville, of course. That game, Louisville, Kentucky, scheduled through 2022. In 2019, Kentucky's got Toledo, Eastern Michigan, and UT Martin. There's a lot of MAC schools here for Kentucky. I think I counted 10 in the next 6 years, 6 to 7 seasons, 10 MAC opponents for Kentucky. In 2019, they've got 2, Toledo and Eastern Michigan. They also have UT Martin. 2020, they've got Eastern Michigan, Kent State, and Eastern Illinois, in addition to the Louisville game. So basically, Kentucky just saying, we're playing Louisville. We're not going to play anybody else tough. 2021, nothing here. Akron, Chattanooga, and Louisiana Monroe. 2022, Miami of Ohio, Youngstown State, Northern Illinois. 2023, Ball State, Eastern Kentucky. 2024, Akron. So Kentucky fans, you have nothing to look forward to in the non-conference. I know you got your Louisville game at the end, but Kentucky has scheduled no other Power 5 opponents. None. NCIS Fanatic 21, and when Alabama does schedule neutral games, it's always south of the Mason-Dixon line. True. Atlanta. It's basically Atlanta. Then they played Wisconsin. That game was in Houston, I believe. So plenty of Alabama bashing here, and much of it is justified. I like looking at our future schedules. We play Notre Dame and Texas in the same year twice. Ohio State plays Notre Dame in Texas the same year, and they flip the home and home, so they don't play them both on the road or at home the same year. But they really double up. So Ohio State's got a week 2019, I believe. They've got nobody there. They apparently couldn't find anyone to play. And then in 2000, must be 20 and 21, the Buckeyes really muscle up with Texas and Notre Dame. Okay. We get to Tennessee here with the West Virginia game this year in Charlotte. Also for the Vols, they've got East Tennessee State, UTEP, and Charlotte. 2019, BYU. Yes, that's the best the Vols can do. In 2019, BYU's the big game. They also have Georgia State, Chattanooga, and UAB. 2020, Tennessee, they just finished up the home and home with Oklahoma a couple years ago in Baker Mayfield. They're going back at it with Oklahoma in 2020 and 24. Other non-conference games for Tennessee in 2020 are Charlotte and Furman. 2021, the Vols have Pitt. Well, Johnny Majors connection there. Pitt, Tennessee. They play in 2021 and 22. Pitt and Tennessee. The Vols also in 2021 at Bowling Green in South Alabama. In 2022, they've got Ball State and Army. Another game against BYU. So Tennessee's got BYU in 2018, 2019, and 2023. They've got Nebraska. Love this. Nebraska, Tennessee. They just played in a bowl game 3 years ago. Tennessee beat Nebraska by a couple touchdowns. So they're playing in 2026-27. And in an odd series to be scheduled this far in advance, Tennessee, Connecticut. Tennessee and UConn back-to-back years, home and home. The Vols going to go up to Storrs, Connecticut and play in 2029. All right, and finally coming down the home stretch of the SEC Eastern Division. Hopefully I haven't missed any good comments here. Kudos to Ohio State for scheduling Notre Dame and Texas the same year. And then we've got for South Carolina, and I like South Carolina's schedules typically. They'll play Clemson, of course, so that's automatically rough, about as tough as it gets. Then in recent years, they've taken on North Carolina a lot, and NC State this past year. Also had Central Florida a couple times when they were good, before they were bad, before they were good. The Central Florida 5 years ago, they played Baylor and beat them in the Fiesta Bowl. South Carolina and Will Muschamp in 2018 have the game against Clemson. Otherwise, they didn't schedule tough this year. They went Coastal Carolina, Marshall, and Chattanooga. 2019, of course, Clemson every year for South Carolina. I'll just go through the other games. They've got North Carolina in Charlotte. So South Carolina and North Carolina getting together again in Charlotte in 19 with App State also on the schedule and Charleston Southern. In 2020, it's a little more Coastal Carolina for the Gamecocks and also East Carolina. Then in 2021, South Carolina making a rare trip outside the Power 5 on the road to East Carolina and also Troy. 2022, South Carolina's got Georgia State, Charlotte, and Wofford, in addition, of course, to Clemson all the way through. North Carolina back on the schedule in 2023. So South Carolina and North Carolina have played two recent games. They also play in 2019 and 23. And then South Carolina, in addition to their game against App State in 2019, have an interesting little home and home with App State on the road at App State 2025 and 27. So South Carolina in the next close to 10 years going to travel out and venture out to App State on the road and also East Carolina. Good for them. I remember when Michigan went up to Connecticut in 2013, almost lost. Yes, they did. I think that was a Thursday or Friday night game, if I remember correctly. And yes, Ohio State versus Lane Kiffin and FIU in 2019. Let's see what Missouri's got for us. Of course, they got blasted by Purdue at home last year. 35-3. This time they've got to go to Purdue and Jeff Brom. And also have UT Martin, Western Kentucky, and Memphis. Okay, 2019, Missouri, West Virginia. It's a reasonable game. Mizzou also has the game at Western Kentucky, Southeast Missouri, and Troy. Okay, 2020 at BYU. If I'm an SEC team, even the likes of Missouri, I'm not making BYU my marquee game. Not going to do it. I can do better than that. But that's the big game in 2020 for the Tigers, the Mizzou Tigers at BYU. They also have Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, and Louisiana Lafayette. 2021, Mizzou at BC. North Texas also on the schedule. 2022, interesting little game, a game that probably should be played on occasion. Mizzou at Kansas State. Nice regional matchup. Also at Middle Tennessee. Then the next year in 2023, Missouri gets K-State at home. They got Middle Tennessee and Memphis again, going on the road to Memphis. The return game for BC's in 2024 in Kansas City. 2025, Missouri has found it in their foresight to lock up Miami of Ohio for 2025. They felt that important to do that. And then interesting, a 4-year contract, 2026, 27, 28, 29. Missouri and basketball fans, who would that be? Mizzou and Illinois. The basketball series coming to football, and it's a regional game. LSU, Dark Horse, Texas A&M should schedule each other again. Yes, they should. And we don't see that happening here in the next 10 years or so. It's not there. And so our last schedule in the SEC is Vanderbilt. Looking at 2018, they go to Notre Dame. They also play Middle Tennessee, Nevada, and Tennessee State. 2019, Vandy at Purdue. I like that game. Vandy at Purdue. Also a game with, that can't be Northwestern. I jotted down NW. That's got to be somebody else. I don't believe Vandy is playing Northwestern and Purdue the same year. NW, Northwestern State, possibly UNLV and East Tennessee State. 2020 for Vandy, they got Mercer, they got Kansas State. So we know that just last season, Kansas State goes to Vandy. They get upset in the top 25. Well, there's the return game, 2020, Vandy going to K-State. They also got Colorado State. Vandy with some interesting little matchups that are good for them coming up here. 2021, a game against Stanford. So the intelligent kids, the brains get together here. Stanford, Vandy. You've got also East Tennessee State, Colorado State on the road, and Houston. You've got a 2022 schedule for Vandy of Hawaii on the road. So the Vandy kids get a nice trip out to Honolulu. Also Wake Forest, a game that probably should be played on a fairly regular basis. Wake and Vandy, both from a regional standpoint and like-tiered teams. Wake and Vandy playing in 2022 and 23. And Vandy liking UNLV as well, playing them again. All right, 2024 is the return trip to Stanford. Vandy at Stanford, also Georgia State on the schedule. Then they got Stanford coming up again in 2025. So 4 games between Vandy and Stanford from 2021 to 27. They play 4 times in 6 years. So that 2025 season for Vandy includes Stanford, Georgia State, and Colorado State. In 2026, this was a bowl game just a few years ago in the Belk Bowl. NC State hammered Vandy. I don't know if it was the Belk, the Music City, forget which bowl game, one of those. NC State blasted Vandy a couple years ago. Well, they get the return game here. 2026, NC State and Vandy. Also Vandy at Colorado State. So there's a slew of Colorado State in there for Vandy as well. Then they go to Stanford in 2027, as we mentioned. They go to NC State in 2028, and another game with the Boilers, Purdue and Vandy playing in Nashville in 2029. All right. I have exhausted the SEC schedules over the next 10 years and always want to hear from you. I will check out the chat one more time to see if there's anything interesting. And then certainly you guys that are just catching up, Leave your comments, suggestions, and questions. This is Mark Rogers and Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. If you've come across my YouTube channel, maybe for the first time right now, maybe you have a time or two and you love college football and you've yet to hit the subscribe button, I ask you to please do that if you love college football. And of course, the audio versions on Google Play, Stitcher, iTunes, and Podbean. I love the SEC ACC rivalry. It definitely works. You've got the 4 nice series there with Louisville, Kentucky, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State. And yes, it's a nice series, South Carolina and Clemson. Very strange that Clemson is now the dominant team after South Carolina won 5 straight, but Dabo Swinney turning the tables. All right, Cash Boy saying that the ACC is overrated. Certainly not in 2016, but they took a bit of a downer last year. All right, folks, we appreciate it. Again, subscribe. If you have college football friends and family that don't know about us, let them know that we're here and we talk college football all the time. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, and I can't do it, wouldn't do it, and in no way could I keep doing it without your help and support. Your comments are fabulous. I made an inventory of the comments that had come in through April. Last year, we were in the 150 range. We're now in the 1,500 range. On our way last year to 7,000 comments. I'm guessing we're going to hit like 30,000 comments this year. So thank you. And that doesn't even include the live chat comments that come in over and over and over and over. So Ole Miss fans and Ohio State fans, you got to check us out on Monday night. We've got Jake Evans from the Rebel Walk lined up to take the live stream and take your comments and questions. And also Tony Gerdeman of the Ozone to talk Buckeyes. All right, folks. Appreciate you jumping on. Big Papi JT. Unfortunately, I missed you. Would love to get your comments and thoughts about future schedules. I've been going crazy running these down over the last several minutes. Interesting to see what the matchups are going to be in college football. We've just checked out the SEC. I am going to come back in future days and look at the other Power 5 conferences' future schedules that range over the next 10 years. So I will see you guys next time. I want you to take care, and I appreciate it, and we will see you next time.